Good evening. This is Corncod One of Nationalist News and Notes. Note to self: despite the fact that Donald Trump is the most influential American politician, and most Republican politicians are afraid to offend him, that does not mean that most Republican politicians, especially major Republican politicians, are a bunch of idiots and New World Order stooges. A piece of evidence. Today, Iowa Senator Joni Ernst, said to be a woman, senator from Iowa, was on that lame-o Face the Nation TV program. And when questioned about the upcoming summit between President Putin of Russia and our president, she said, "I don't see that Russia would ever be a true friend or ally to the United States of America. And Russia is not our friend." Well, when you hear a politician talk like that, you know they're a New World Order stooge, because peace and good relations between Russia and the United States are always a possibility. Probably the greatest foreign policy genius that ever existed on the face of the earth was Bismarck, the great founder of modern Germany, who once said, "The first rule of politics is always a good treaty with Russia." And the old kraut was right. Why do we have bad and unhappy relations with Russia? Oh, yeah, that's right. When the Cold War ended, instead of pursuing peaceful and amicable relations with Russia and the Russian people, the United States government decided it would try to turn Russia into a puppet state. You know, large, proud nations with long histories generally are not too happy about being puppets of more powerful states. And so the efforts of the American government since the Cold War to isolate, to denigrate, to surround and dominate Russia have been most regrettable. Here, the United States is involved in all sorts of disputes with the Islamic world, both Sunni and Shia, crossing swords with North Korea, although that may have been at least partially solved recently, ready to invade Venezuela. But I'm fairly confident our smart president won't get involved in any major war. That's my prediction. But our foreign policy establishment, our military-industrial establishment, the Republican Party establishment, and the Democratic Party establishment are all pushing hostile relations with Russia. Good relations between Russia and the United States are very possible. But we've made some terrible mistakes. 3 presidents, the 3 stooges I call them, Bush, Clinton, and Obama, made horrendous errors in attempting to isolate Russia, make Russia poor, etc. For one of the worst things that we'd ever done was try to turn the first real post-Soviet president, Boris Yeltsin, a terrible leader, a drunkard, and a bit of a screwball, into an American puppet, which they succeeded. Yeltsin was a Western puppet. And the results for his country was disastrous. Basically, what happened is that the country was taken over by 7 oligarchs. 6 of them, I might add, were rootless cosmopolitans. And the country was basically raped. All the industrial machinery, most of the industrial machinery in the country was bought up by these vagabonds and sold overseas for pennies on the dollar, thus almost completely destroying Russia's industrial base. The other horrible mistake was done by the ridiculous Mr. and Mrs. Clinton, and in particular President Clinton, who pushed hard, along with the rest of the Eastern establishment, the New World Order, and European establishment politicians, to expand NATO into Eastern Europe, up to and including the Baltic states. So what we had was a situation where we had countries with a dagger in the heart of Russia. Now, was this necessary? Russia was, and to a certain extent is right now, a relatively weak power. Now, of course, that's in terms of projecting offensive power. Russia will still and always be a great defensive power. So these idiots in the democratic media were pushing the idea of offensive action against Russia someday and suddenly becoming cold warriors is horrible. Now, the greatest American foreign policy genius and developer of the containment theory in the late 40s and early 50s against Soviet imperialism, which was opposed by the rollback theory, which would have probably brought nuclear war in the United States, was the brilliant George Kennan. And the elderly Kennan, in 1998, just a couple of years before the poor gentleman passed away, wrote that expanding NATO would be the most fateful error of American foreign policy in the post-Cold War era. Because he knew, he was a great Russia expert, spent many years in Moscow with the State Department. Oh, and by the way, if you ever get a chance, I know it's several volumes, read George Kennan's memoirs. Oh, I can barely say with words how great Kennan's memoirs were. You would think, oh, just a sort of ordinary American diplomat. But the guy was like a super, not only a super genius, but he could write with lyrical beauty about foreign policy, which, believe me, is a hard thing. But Kennan knew that an overly aggressive attitude toward Russia would be disastrous for European and American security and would push a new Cold War, something the Russians don't want, something that any sane person in the United States does not want. But apparently, the New World Order, the hawks in the Republican Party, the rootless cosmopolitan neoconservatives, all seem to want hostilities with Russia. They're insane. I mean, they're following the same mistakes that Napoleon made, that Hitler made. Going back to that quote I just gave from Bismarck, a good peace treaty with Russia is the first rule of politics. And so what happened was, we let Yeltsin, under Yeltsin, we let these people rape the country, and now we've sought to encircle Russia, and it's a relatively weakened Russia. No military threat to the United States. You know, they used to have a navy. Half of it lies sunk in the Black Sea right now. So Russia's no threat to the United States, doesn't want to be a threat to the United States, has no intention of invading Western Europe, because one of the main sources of their income is, of course, natural gas, which is sold to Western Europe. So all Russia really wants to do is sometimes protect Russian minorities in certain areas like the Baltic states. And of course, the biggest error was when Western intelligence agencies, George Soros, the State Department, stupid Obama, overthrew the Russia-friendly government in the Ukraine and replaced it with an anti-Russian government that was eager to join the EU and presumably NATO. And so that's why Putin was forced to invade the Crimea to make sure that he had a Black Sea naval base. I mean, Russia's always interested in warm water ports because so many of its ports are in icy areas. I mean, this is middle school geopolitics. This is geopolitics you should have learned in 8th grade. And the morons of the New World Order, the Democratic Party, the neocons, and most of the Republicans, like this idiotic Joni Ernst, have forgotten all fundamental rules of foreign policy. And so we've been hostile to Russia. It is my great hope that our brilliant president can pour oil on the waters of the roiling and sad state of Russian-American relations. Unfortunately, I think Trump has felt compelled to be a little bit more tougher on Russia than he needed to be because of all these false accusations that he's some sort of puppet of the Russian government. I think we're all beginning to learn that that's a bunch of complete and utter nonsense. It's a crazy lie. But I hope that his original positive attitude toward Vladimir Putin will be a key to peace. I think Putin's a great figure in Russian history. I think someday they will, 100 years from now, I think Russians will sing songs about his greatness because of his excellent economic policies that brought back Russia from the brink of ruin. It was something I've been advocating for 30 years, which is a flat tax. Russia has a flat tax, my friends. And it's been excellent for their economy. Until the Americans and Western Europeans put all these sanctions on them. But we can have good relations with Russia. We do not need a new Cold War. The major people pushing for a new Cold War between Russia and the United States are the rootless cosmopolitans represented by the neoconservatives and the Jewish lobby and the American defense industry, because they want to be able to sell their expensive junk to Eastern European countries. Because if those countries become part of NATO, NATO will require them to upgrade their militaries to Western standards, and so they'll have to buy fighter planes and tanks and everything else from U.S. and Western European defense contractors. So once again, the defense contractors, the military-industrial complex that General Eisenhower warned us about, 60 years ago, are once again ruining American foreign policy. Let us go for peace with the Russian people. I think it's going to be a lot easier than dealing with the North Koreans. And I think if Trump gets a good start on maintaining good relations, I think we could have good relations guaranteed for about 50 years, as long as some idiot Democrat doesn't get in office. This is Corncod One of Nationalist News and Notes, signing off.